single day, like I've always done and always will.
Passing these bills on the floor, making yet another stand.
Welcome to this week's edition of New York Now. I'm Chantal Destra. The federal government shutdown is in its fourth week with no clear end in sight. Republicans and Democrats on Capitol Hill could not agree over a bill that would fund the government, causing the government to officially shut down on October 1st. Senate Democrats want to roll back expiring health care allowances, while Republicans and President Donald Trump say that's a non-starter. As a result, many federal social service programs are not being funded and are at risk. One of them is the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, also known as SNAP. Here in New York, Governor Kathy Hochul held a press conference at the top of the week with members of the New York Democratic Congressional Delegation to rally against the cuts to food assistance programs.
We know how to fight back. And we will fight back. And let's just frame what is happening. We have Donald Trump and a whole lot of spineless followers in Washington, his enablers, who are literally, like, this is what's happening. They're waging an all-out war on the working class. Because how else can you describe all the programs that they're just destroying?
Later in the week, the governor also declared a state of emergency for the federal cuts and announced $65 million in state funds for emergency food assistance. We'll continue to bring you updates on the government shutdown and the effects on New York right here on the show and online at nynow.org. Now turning to our next topic. Earlier this year, the state legislature passed several bills aimed at reforming the state's election laws. While many of those bills now await the governor's signature for enactment, our Elise Klein brings us a deep dive on what the impact of those bills would mean for midterm elections next year. Here's that story.
During the most recent legislative session, state lawmakers passed several bills aiming to advance election reform that could have an impact on upcoming elections, including the next big one, the 2026 midterms. Two bills related to multi-state voter list maintenance organizations and websites paid for by political committees will head to the governor's desk soon for her review. The first bill, colloquially known as the ERIC bill, ERIC standing for the Electronic Registration Information Center, would authorize the State Board of Elections to join certain multi-state voter list maintenance organizations. State Senator James Skoufis, a Democrat representing parts of Orange County and a lead sponsor of the bill, says this legislation will have an important impact on preventing voter fraud.
Voter fraud is very rare, but it does occasionally happen. And it's incumbent upon us as state government to ensure that we have the tools put in place to make sure that our voter rolls are as updated and accurate as possible.
Skoufis says this multi-state compact would help the states stay organized in their knowledge of ineligible voters, such as individuals who died or moved away. The bill passed unanimously in both chambers last session. While it wasn't successful in previous years, Skoufis says the latest version of the bill addressed some technical issues and brought in more stakeholders. State Senator Gustavo Rivera, a Democrat representing parts of the Bronx and a co-sponsor of the bill, says he voted for the bill in addition to other election-related bills for a very simple reason.
We have to do everything in our power in the state of New York to strengthen our democratic institutions. There's a lot of tweaking that we've done over the last couple of years to voting systems, to how people can register to vote, when they can register to vote, how elections are actually operated, et cetera. And all of these things are important.
State Senator Mark Walchek, a Republican representing Fulton and Lewis counties and a ranking member of the Elections Committee, says while other election laws are more partisan in their support, this is a bill that just made sense to a lot of legislators on both sides of the aisle.
There are so many issues that are pretty partisan and pretty contentious in the Elections Committee. Joining ERIC was one of those that wasn't as much so. Both parties want to see the elections rolls cleaned up as much as possible. Voters that have moved to other states and registered in other states or have deceased, we want to see the voter rolls cleaned up. That benefits everyone, including Board of Elections and our taxpayers in the state of New York.
Some grassroots organizations like the League of Women Voters haven't taken a public stance of support for the bill, but they do say this bill could be impactful for New Yorkers. Erica Smicka, the executive director of the League of Women Voters New York, says the bill would help increase data sharing in a way that is secure.
New York State's voter rolls are incredibly dense, and the last thing we want to see is folks being culled from those voter rolls unnecessarily or, not for the right reasons. So Eric really helps to consolidate this data and make it easier for boards to identify, voters who are no longer eligible voters in their area.
The second bill would require that public-facing websites operated by political committees include information about who is funding the sites. Many lawmakers say this bill is a simple technical fix to provide voters with more transparency.
It was surprising to me that it was an election law already, and would surprise most voters and people that pay attention to these things that it wasn't already law. So I saw this as a technical cleanup, making sure that it is clear who's paying for a political website.
This bill also passed unanimously, while many other election bills that went through the most recent legislative session were more controversial, not making it across the finish line. Some of the bills that didn't pass were related to automatic voter registration for people applying for Department of Motor Vehicles documentation and Medicaid enrollees. State Senator Michael Gianaris, a Democrat representing Western Queens and a sponsor of some of the bills that didn't pass both houses, says he plans to work with the Assembly to try and get his bills further next session.
Be back at it again in January when we're in session and hopefully make some more progress on it.
If both the bills that passed are signed into law, they will have an impact starting in the next election cycle, which will be a big one, the 2026 midterm elections, encompassing a gubernatorial race, state legislators, and United States congressional representatives and senators. Another controversial election bill that was signed into law in 2023 will also have an effect, the even year election law. The even year election law, aiming to consolidate elections, boost voter turnout, and save taxpayer dollars, faced immediate controversy as soon as it was passed and signed into law. The lawsuits filed that the state didn't have jurisdiction to make such a change, questioning the legislation's constitutionality. In October of last year, the law was struck down by a state Supreme Court. In May, that decision was overturned by an appellate court, which in recent weeks was upheld by the highest court of the state, the Court of Appeals. Scuba says pushback from local offices in counties wasn't surprising, but he's glad it worked out in the end.
It was a very welcome decision. It was a unanimous decision, including Republican judges sided with the state and the state legislature on this law's constitutionality. But most importantly, this is a win for voters and taxpayers and our democracy.
Scuba says this change will dramatically increase voter turnout. A recent report from Citizens Union shows voter turnout can increase as a result of this kind of policy. Ben Weinberg, the director of public policy at Citizens Union, says New York State and other states across the country in off-year elections are extremely low compared to even-year elections, typically have sometimes even a third turnout in odd years.
In 2023, the election for Suffolk County Executive, we saw 27% voter turnout in that odd year. In 2022, an even year midterm gubernatorial election, we saw 54% turnout, right? For governor in Suffolk County, obviously. We see the same difference in other counties across the state. So it's about half or a substantial drop in voter turnout between the odd year and the even year.
Meanwhile, Senator Walczyk argues it's okay to have lower turnout for local elections in odd years.
You may not have as many people turn out in an odd year. That's okay. The people who are very interested in their local government will show up in that odd year. And we really want quality voters over quantity of voters.
Some other Republican lawmakers assert this new law is a political strategy to help Democrats win elections. State Senator George Borrello, a Republican representing parts of the Finger Lakes, says this is bad government, worried about local candidates' ability to compete financially with campaign messaging alongside federal and state candidates.
It's very bad in the sense that you're just not going to give enough attention, time to the local issues that impact the quality of life in so many areas.
But Weinberg argues even-year elections will likely have the opposite effect.
The goal of this law is really to strengthen our local democracy by boosting voter turnout for local offices, by highlighting, elevating the importance of local issues, and by drawing a new generation of voters into our local participation.
Senator Gianaris adds the argument that local candidates wouldn't be able to compete is nonsense.
It's excuses. If they're worried about that, they should enact public campaign financing options in these localities the way we have now in New York State. But the bottom line is what they're really worried about is that if more people are participating in our democracy, that means bad things for them politically.
Senator Wolchek argues that he doesn't think this bill will be bad for Republicans, but he is against the new law, stressing again concerns for local candidates being lost in the mix.
Republicans will generally respect that there is the government that is closer to the people serves them the best, that there's an even and an odd year for a reason, that we don't lump in these town races and county races in with the presidential and gubernatorial and congressional races that are going on, because we don't want somebody running for county legislature or town supervisor to have to compete for ad time with somebody that's running for Congress or the president of the United States.
While some Republicans say this law is a political strategy, some Democrats share that sentiment.
This was only controversial among some elected officials who wanted to preserve these very low turnout elections that helped get them elected. You know, it's really astonishing that you have public servants holding office who prefer fewer people come out and vote.
Political expert Jim Twombly, professor emeritus of political science from Elmira College, says the issue likely clashes between Democrats and Republicans because Democrats tend to turn out in larger numbers and be more plugged in for even-year elections.
Democratic voters tend to be a little bit more tuned out in terms of the local elections. Their focus tends to be with national and international issues, so that they're going to be paying more attention in the even years. Plus, there's a great deal more media attention to even year elections.
But the issue wasn't simply split between Democrats and Republicans. Some Democrats aren't a fan of the policy either. Assemblymember John McDonald, a Democrat representing parts of the Capital Region, says as a former mayor, his concern for local candidates is that their campaigns will get caught up in hot-button issues more central to roles holding higher political office.
At the end of the day, local governments, their responsibility is pretty simple. Keep the streets clean, control the taxes, and foster economic development, and keep it safe. That's their job. But when you have statewide issues, so we've had some pretty hot ones over the years, and particularly when gun issues come up or some of the reproductive health rights bills come up, it gets a lot of attention, and quite frankly, it could have an impact on down-ballot races.
While Democrats and Republicans have varying opinions on the matter, the public seems welcoming to the idea. Andrew Calderwood, an Onondaga County resident and voter, says he thinks if moving certain races to even election years increases turnout, it's a great idea. He says this new law means more efficiency, and he's not alone.
My friends and family are in favor of that kind of idea, too. I know not everyone's on the same page, but the people I hang out with are in favor of making it more efficient, having the local and state elections, even national elections when the cycle hits, all on at the same day, because I think it's more about getting people out to vote.
Kiera D'Souza, a college student at the University of Albany and voter, says she hopes the new policy will increase voter turnout and participation, especially for folks that find voting each year tiring. D'Souza also says the time between elections could improve voters' overall knowledge about the candidates on the ballot.
It gives you at least some time to know your candidate, get to know your candidate, see what's going on. Gives you enough time to see if they change as they continue on their run. So I feel like it should be good. I feel like 2 years isn't bad. I feel like 2 years, it gives people honest enough time to do what they need to do or figure out what they need to figure out.
Iman Ibrahim, a local Albany resident and voter, says moving local races to even election years will uplift local races.
You have a lot of people that probably don't even know that there's a mayoral election happening in our city of Albany. Consolidating those dates and just making them available for everyone will definitely help voter turnout in the future and ongoing.
Weinberg says we should expect to see a much higher turnout in local offices and also an electorate that is more representative of jurisdictions overall, including more young and diverse voters. The November 2026 midterm elections may be a year out at this point, but it is going to arrive soon enough, and that's when we'll see how this all pans out. Elise Klein, New York Now.
And for more information on those bills, you can visit our website. Again, that's at nynow.org. Now turning to another important topic. Since getting established in 2021, the New York State Office of Cannabis Management has been issuing licenses for businesses to participate in the state's legal market. Part of that work also includes informing the public about the benefits and uses of medical cannabis. We sat down with Dr. June Chin, who serves as the Chief Medical Officer of OCM, to understand the work of the State Department and what's ahead. Here's that conversation. Thank you so much for connecting with us, Dr. Chen.
So happy to be here. Thank you for hosting me.
Of course. Now, to start out, can you tell us a little bit about your work as Chief Medical Officer for the New York State Office of Cannabis Management? What does that entail?
Absolutely. So as Chief Medical Officer for New York State OCM, I oversee our public health and education department, as well as our health, science, safety, and research.
And what are some of your own long-term goals for the office?
My long-term goals for the office includes putting science and data at the heart of how New York regulates cannabis. And I'll tell you what I mean. For example, tracking ED visits, making sure there's product safety and public health outcomes with our Department of Health partners as well. I'm also very prioritizing protecting and expanding our medical program so that no patient is left behind. And also investing in education, helping clinicians and communities make informed choices, confident choices about cannabis and the care that surrounds it.
And for our viewers who may be less familiar, what are some of the most common uses of medical cannabis, and how are you hoping to expand that sector?
Some of the most common uses of medical cannabis includes, number one, chronic pain. And chronic pain can stem from arthritic issues, so maybe rheumatoid arthritis. Some can stem from musculoskeletal issues, so for your typical low back pain, for example. And then sometimes there's mobility and hip issues, for example. So those are some of the issues we see quite often with chronic pain. We also see it for sleep disruption, such as insomnia, cancer care, helping patients get through chemotherapy. Medical cannabis is very effective for increasing appetite, decreasing pain, for example, during chemo and radiation, and helping patients just get through the chemo treatment that much easier.
And how is your office hoping to expand that sector in the work that you're doing?
We're hoping to expand the sector. The governor has a bill that's sitting on her desk, and we're hoping she's going to sign it soon. But how it expands it is it offers reciprocity. So medical patients that are traveling into New York from other states, just think of the tri-state area, New Jersey, Connecticut, for example, up and down the Northeast corridor. If they have a medical cannabis certification from a different state, they can shop in New York if they come into New York and use the medical cannabis products here. We are also looking at expanding caregiver abilities so that patients that rely on caregivers to pick up medicine, to help them access medicine, we make that a lot easier for them. That's very, very important. And then also provider education. We hope to bring on more providers and educate them about incorporating medical cannabis in their standard of care. And we're hoping that the bill will help alleviate some of that as well. And then home grow, patients that want to grow their own medicine. We are creating ways to expand the ease of that as well.
Can you tell us about some of the risks that are associated with medical cannabis and how your office is hoping to mitigate those risks moving forward?
Well, it depends on where you're coming from. So I say from a patient perspective, some of the risks are it can interact with your current medication regimen. So you really want to make sure that you are letting your provider know that you're starting medical cannabis. And that goes for any herbal medication, right? If you're taking vitamins or supplements or any herbal medication, you do want to let your provider know because it can interact with prescription medication. Sometimes we have elderly patients. They have to be forewarned on certain cannabis formulations that might make them sleepy, or it might be too strong. It might make them dizzy. So if they live alone, if they're getting up in the middle of the night to use the restroom, you want to take fall precautions, for example. So that from a patient's perspective. And then from a public health perspective, we always talk about safe storage. If you are a medical cannabis patient, but you have children at home, you want to make sure that you lock it up, you store it safely, you put it out of sight, out of temptation. Sometimes patients don't realize that they left it in their dresser or the kitchen table, for example, and kids and pets can get to it. So from a public health perspective, safe storage is in all of our campaigns.
And it's my understanding that your office will be hosting the second annual Medical Cannabis Symposium in just a few weeks. So can you tell us what you're hoping to achieve with this conference?
Yes, yes, yes. So OCM and Northwell Health, we're hosting that second annual New York Medical Cannabis Symposium in Long Island, and we're bridging science, bedside care, and public health practice. So we're giving providers practical tools to guide patients safely and responsibly. So the day before the symposium on November 6th, providers can come and take a CME course and become certifying practitioners. So they can learn about what cannabis science is, the different formulations out there, the pros and cons of recommending cannabis, how to incorporate it into standard of care. And then the day of the symposium, we have a wonderful, robust agenda of researchers, physicians, nurse practitioners, public health specialists talking about research and what's out there, what's missing, for example, and also pediatrics, senior care. We're talking about behavioral health. We're talking about, again, public health, chronic pain. So really making sure that we have a robust agenda to reach all types of practitioners so they can learn the pros and the cons about cannabis care.
And how many people is your office expecting to attend this conference? And how has your office been getting the word out there to New Yorkers?
Well, you're helping us get the word out there. We have over 100 registered participants, and for the practitioner course, for the health provider course, we have over 150, and that was as of a couple of days ago, so I'm sure that number has gone up. But there is a strong interest in learning about cannabis care as legalization, becomes more widespread. Practitioners are realizing they have to be part of the conversation.
And can you tell us more about the educational aspect of your role? How are you ensuring that New Yorkers will understand the benefits of medical cannabis moving forward?
Well, I mean, legalization isn't just policy. It's really a public health opportunity, right? So if we think about it, it allows us to replace stigma with science to promote safer and informed choices. So the medical and adult use markets work hand in hand. Patients need precise dosing and clinical guidance. Adult use side ensures safer, tested products and reduces stigma. So that education has to go hand in hand, and we're building a culture of responsibility. We're building a culture of access that reaches every New Yorker, no matter what zip code.
And you mentioned those stigmas. What are some of the most common misconceptions when it comes to the work that your office is doing and the cannabis industry here in New York?
Well, the stigmas are still there. I think a lot of patients don't want to talk about it with their health provider. They are afraid that it might taint their relationship with the health provider. The provider might think that it's a gateway to other drugs, for example. That's still there, that stigma. Some patients want to try it, but they are afraid if I bring it up to my doctor, they'll think, a certain way about me, for example. I have parents, that have children at home, and they don't want to become a medical patient because they have a misconception that it's going to affect, how they parent, how do they talk to their children about it. Mm-hmm. So they're not as open about it with education. So I think the stigma is still very, very deep, and we continue to educate folks about that through our public health and education team.
And how would you say New York stacks up against other states when it comes to the legal cannabis industry, medical cannabis, and investments into its growth?
I think cannabis is a complex topic, but complexity doesn't mean it has to be confusing. And I think New York has really thought of all facets, all spokes of the wheel, if you will, of cannabis legalization. I can't think of another state that has a chief medical officer. We have a very robust public health team. We work with other sibling agencies, Department of Health, the Office of Mental Health, OASIS, DMV. So it's a very integrative system. We have a community grants and reinvestment. So we think about ways that we can reinvest into our underserved and underinsured communities. And we talk about health equity. We talk about social equity in all of the ways that we incorporate cannabis regulation as well.
And looking ahead to the next session, what level of funding will your office be asking the state for in the next state budget to support the work that you're doing?
I can't be specific about state funding and budget. That's out of my scope as chief medical officer, but that's a good question.
Absolutely. Well, unfortunately, that is all the time we have for right now, but we thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us.
Thank you so much.
And we were speaking with Dr. June Chen, Chief Medical Officer for the New York State Office of Cannabis Management. And for more information on OCM, you can visit our website. Again, that's at nynow.org. You can also subscribe to our newsletter by going to newsletter.nynow.org or by scanning the QR code on your screen. Well, that does it for this edition of New York Now. Thank you for tuning in, and see you next week.
Funding for New York Now is provided by WNET,